Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Today we're going to be testing out the brand new Viseart Petite Force quads. So they released two new quads for their spring collection. We have the Hesperides palette and we have the Isolde palette. I almost didn't pick these up because they look kind of similar to each other, at least in photos. So I did review the two quads that they released for holiday, and I had a few of you comment that you'd be interested in seeing more Viseart reviews. So here we are back with the two brand new quads. The description of these is spring awakens with sublime sweetness as Petite Force, Hesperides, and Isolde invite you to luxuriate in a duo of breathtakingly beautiful palettes inspired by fables etched in the stars and whispered by the ancients. Their writer is creative. Brand new quartets of quintessential opulence inspired by mythical tales and celestial love, Hesperides and Isolde are adorned with ravishingly romantic shimmers and sumptuously sensual mattes that dance in harmony with the spirit of springtime. These are available now on Beautylish and on Viseart's website. If you can, I do recommend ordering from Beautylish because the Viseart shipping really takes forever. These have been out for a few weeks and I just got them in. But these are both made in the US and have a 36-month shelf life. And like I mentioned, I almost didn't pick these up because I thought they looked a little bit similar in the photos. But first up, we have the Isolde palette. So you can see this is very, very pretty. I do think this is the more subtle of the two. And then we have the Hesperides palette. So this one is a little bit deeper. There we go. When you place them side by side, I still think there's a lot of similarities in the two of them, but let's look at some swatches. So I'll start with the Isolde palette. Okay, so this is the Isolde palette and it is beautiful. Honestly, I am really, really loving how that looks. I wasn't expecting to love it quite so much, but these shimmers really are having some impact. Let's swatch Hesperides right next to it. Okay, so there is Hesperides swatched right beside Isolde. So the Hesperides actually seems to have a little bit more of a pink, whereas the Isolde palette actually leans a little heavier into those mauve-y brownie pinks a little bit. So there is a difference there, which I think is interesting. Okay, so let's get into creating some looks with these. I'm going to do a look on each eye. Okay, so I just zoomed you in a bit and we are going to start putting these on the eyes. I do have some very similar comparisons toward the end, and I think I also forgot to mention these do retail for $25 US or $34.95 Canadian. So just keep that in mind, but let's get to putting these on the eyes. I'm going to start with the Hesperides palette. So I am going to start with the shade Aurora and just blending this one into the crease. I do love Viseart mattes. I find it's interesting because when they swatch, they feel buttery to the touch, but actually swatching them out, they often end up being a little bit chunky, if you will, but then you blend them on the eyes and they just blend like butter. I don't know if there's anything quite like a Viseart matte. Okay, I'm just grabbing a slightly smaller brush and I'm going into the shade Delphic. And this one is going to be my outer corner shade. Again, I just love their mattes. They just blend together. I do think that Viseart can be very repetitive, especially if you have a larger Viseart collection. I think you'll find you have a lot of these shades over and over again. That's so pretty. I like that. I'm going to take a flat brush. The thing I love about Viseart shimmers is that they don't necessarily need to be applied with a finger. I typically apply all shimmer shadows with a finger. With Viseart, I just don't find it necessary. You can do it and it will look really nice, but Viseart lets me get away with a brush, which I appreciate. So I'm going into Asperia. I think this is going to be my all over lid shade. And this one does seem to be very, very light, but still quite pretty. I did just quickly spray my brush to get a little bit more impact. And that looks really, really pretty. It's so soft and ethereal, but just for the sake of using all of these, I am going to go into Sylph, I think is the shade name, with the other side of the brush. And I'm just going to pat this on the outer corner to merge the shimmers into those outer corner mattes. All right. And that is the look with the Hesperides palette. Okay, let's move over to the Isolde palette on this side, and then I will pop on some mascara and show you what the finished looks look like. So I'm just gonna pop in to the shade Isolde. This looks like a beautiful neutral everyday brown. So doing as I usually do, blending on the outer corner and up into the crease. These would be really pretty palettes to do like a halo eye with as well. This shade's giving quite a bit more depth than the one in the Hesperides palette, the lightest matte. This one's giving me a lot more to work with. Just adding the littlest bit more on that outer corner to see how much depth I can get with it. Yeah, that's really nice actually. Again, just blending like a dream. I'm barely doing any work here. Grabbing that smaller brush, I did just clean it off on my Sigma switch and just lightly dipping in to the shade Roseate. And this one is more of a satin, it's not really a matte. This palette really only has one true matte shade to it, but it still gives a really, really nice look on the outer corner especially. I mean, this would be pretty all over the lid as well, but I really want to play with these shimmers. So I just cleaned off that flat shader brush and I'm going to go in to Louis, just right here. And this is picking up beautifully with a brush. Oh, that's so pretty. Just patting that all over. That's a really pretty shade. Okay, I think that looks really, really pretty. I do want to go back into this shade just to see if I can build up a little bit more depth out here. Okay, perfect. Then I want to go into this very first shade. This is called Elixir and it just looks so beautiful. And popping this one on that inner portion. That's beautiful. All right, so I just quickly popped on some mascara. So we have the final look with the Hesperides palette, and I think it's really pretty, very easy, very everyday, but also definitely leaning a little bit more into those pinky tones. And then we have the Isolde palette, which is of course my favorite because it leans really into those, you know, more almost cool tone, neutral browns. I just think it's so pretty. And I love that it has this really light, bright shade to brighten things up. I think that's the one thing this palette is missing. Okay, let me zoom you out and then share my thoughts and some comparisons. So first, let's talk about the Isolde palette. So the very first palette that came to mind when looking at both of these palettes is actually the Natasha Denona retro palette, and seeing it side by side, you can still see some similarities here. I'll pop up the swatches and you can see where I was sort of going with that because I found that both of these quads kind of leaned into those almost mauve browns. For the Hesperides palette, this one is so pretty and I did almost fully duplicate this one, mostly with the retro palette once again because this palette very much leaning into those mauve browns. Very, very close. The one shade that made it challenging was this one right here, and I found one very similar in the Love palette from Natasha Denona. The one in Natasha Denona is a little bit brighter, but it's the shade Giving right here. So I will pop up the swatches. So if you do have those two, I would definitely pass on this because you're going to get something very, very similar. I think either way, if you have the retro palette, you can easily create looks that you would create with these two quads. I do feel like the retro palette might have played some inspiration in these quads. I think you'll easily be able to recreate the looks. So overall, do I think these are worth it? I think they're both very, very beautiful. If I had to pick one, I would go with Isolde because I found the shimmers to be a little bit more creamy, a little bit more pigmented, and I just love a good cool toned, leaning, neutralish brown. This one is also very, very pretty, but it didn't excite me as much as the Isolde palette. I thought it was going to be the other way around. When I first saw them in photos, they looked quite similar. They still kind of do. Of course, this one is more pinky, but I thought they looked pretty similar. Seeing them swatched out, this one is definitely, like I said, more pinky. I thought this would still be more of a favorite. On the eyes, the Isolde palette definitely won out. So it really depends on your collection. In my opinion, I think if you have the Natasha Denona Retro, I'd probably skip these altogether because I think you have them. But I do think these are very beautiful. The quality did not miss. It never really does with Viseart, but I think they're both absolutely stunning. And I'm glad I did pick them up. Just note that, of course, they're not unique. And if you do have Viseart palettes in your collection, you might already have these types of shades. That is it for me today. Let me know down below if you're planning to pick these up. What are your thoughts? Do you have any questions that maybe I didn't quite answer? Let me know. I love hearing from you guys so much. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!